Since it's been 2 months since I've talked about Foster's, and believe it or not, it's probably going to happen in the next several months until the new year, I've decided that I'm going to be reviewing Destination Imagination, since I've actually watched this movie so many times, and it was the final episode or project to be produced from the creators of this show. And if anyone's going to bother on saying that this is supposed to be the finale of the show instead of Goodbye to Blue, I haven't gotten to Goodbye to Blue yet, and it's literally at the end of my list when it comes to reviewing episodes from this show. But I will say that this is one of the best Cartoon Network movies I've seen during the time where this movie aired. Granted, there are other movies that can easily top this, but I will say that this is better than the We Bare Bears movie. Now you're showing on to why I don't show favoritism towards cartoons that I enjoy the most, right? Anyway, Frankie as the main character, also her own movie basically, I'm just gonna say this right now that Frankie actually deserves so much, and I'm pretty sure that the people who wrote this movie can tell that they made so many terrible mistakes with Frankie in this show. Regardless if it's mostly up for debate, I still think it's mostly of how Frankie is always treated with everyone around him. And even though there are a few moments where she gets some kind of break when it comes to all the stress that she went through, it still wasn't enough. And considering that this movie is all about her leaving her old life and starting a new one into an imaginary world, this show became a lot more unique when they take the opportunity to capitalize these ideals. And whether you completely look at the bad episodes, this movie, along with good episodes, can sometimes overshadow the bad episodes. I may say that the bad episodes overshadow the good episodes because of the mean-spirited tone, but considering that the mean-spirited tone is somewhat active in this movie, it still isn't over the top in force when it comes to the other terrible episodes from this show. And it's mostly due to the fact that the entire movie is taking place in an imaginary world, and we don't usually see this type of ideal done before when it comes to previous episodes, because all we see is imaginary friends in the human world. I know you can say something else instead of calling it the human world, but I'm just saying it because Bears talking in the human world, along with gems in the human world, other stuff, other cartoons, regardless with how different they are with each other when it comes to its characters, it's always taking place in the human world. Not all of them, but still. Getting back to the imaginary world that Frankie got in because he found a toy box from someone, and when she gets into the toy box, she enters in this imaginary world where there's no faces. There was 0 faces, and all she can hear is the world's voice. And let me just say that the imaginary friend is called Ward. That's his name. That's really his name. And let me just say that for someone who created this entire world, I gotta say, his or her imagination is beyond way more than any of the people who created their imaginary friends in this show. In the opening of this movie, the two parents are about to take the toy box to Foster's, and they tell their youngest son that everything is going to be alright. Let me just say for how much that this family had went through so much stress in order to get out of the box, and of how the imaginary friend reacts in such a most depressing tone, and also emotional breakdowns that he's dealing with because of the departure with his best friend. This movie obviously knew what it was doing when it's taking itself seriously and not going completely mean-spirited on our faces. And when we get into the imagination world when the main characters are attempting to save Frankie, it's a lot more harmless of what you usually expect when it comes to imagination, but in the world instead of a friend. Which is what really makes this movie a lot more better compared to other movies. And I'm pretty sure if there's a reason for one person to make one imaginary friend, it's probably because of the imagination world itself. So many faceless people, and yet only one face that moves around in this entire world can take control of that face while also having different voices. I don't know if this is actually something that the creators of the show have so much talent when it comes to making imaginary friends a lot more great, but also making an entire world centering around the imagination itself is beyond brilliant if you ask me. And with this movie coming out in 2008, which is one of the final pieces of media that we get from Foster's, that is somewhat of an accomplishment. But before I get back to the plot along with the imagination world itself, let's go talk about Mr. Herriman in this movie, since this is where he takes everything back from Frankie after completely abusing her for way too long in the show. Since that, when Frankie is away along with the main characters, he needs to find someone else to do most of the chores in the building, and consider this resents him of doing all the chores by himself. The bit where he says that he's getting sick and tired of not gaining respect from anyone, even though that's what Frankie is feeling at the moment, is actually something that I won't usually forgive Mr. Herriman for saying the same words that Frankie mentioned in this movie. But considering that Frankie went into the toy box despite of disobeying Mr. Herriman's orders, I gotta say that Mr. Herriman had to take everything the hard way when it comes to dealing with all the chores that Frankie did in the past. Especially of how it feels to being disrespected while also being mostly abused at times. And since that Mr. Herriman didn't got abused when he was doing the chores by himself, I gotta say that his realization towards the end really makes his character somewhat redeemable once you see this movie after watching all the episodes before. And towards the end, while the main characters manage to succeed their goal, it wouldn't make any difference since that Frankie decides to spend most of her time in the imagination world instead of the real world, because she is always mistreated while also not getting respect from anyone. So I'm pretty sure that if this scene wouldn't happen, I'm pretty sure that these characters won't learn anything from Frankie whatsoever, especially with all the stress that they put Frankie in previous seasons. And when you take that in account when it comes to the ending when Mr. Herriman apologizes to Frankie while also accepting her choice when it comes to releasing the imaginary friend out from the toy box, I'm pretty sure that in the 7th season, if there was going to be a 7th season, but there wasn't, but if there were, I'm pretty sure that we're probably going to see a lot more scenes involving Mr. Herriman and Frankie getting along. And if any of you guys are going to say that some episodes, mainly fools and regularizations, if I got that episode title right, while Mr. Herriman is still being selfish towards Frankie, it's a work in progress. Not everything is gonna go 100%, even though that this movie actually shows that Mr. Herriman has a heart of gold. Sometimes. Getting back to the main characters, mainly Mac, Blue, Eduardo, Wilt, and Coco, since they're not mostly flanderized other than them desperately want Frankie to do everything, they're really okay, including Blue. It's honestly unbelievable to think that Blue is somewhat tolerable in this entire movie. Usually he will make things worse for the other characters, but thankfully it wasn't the case in this entire movie. Granted, people are going to debate that he is still the same age as Mac. He's gonna remain that age at the end of time, but it doesn't excuse most of the bad episodes centering around him. And I'm actually kind of thankful that if he was actually that character in this movie, then this movie would have been less watchable, and I would rather watch the We Bare Bears movie over this. But like I said, this movie is better than the We Bare Bears movie. But when you put these 5 characters into this imagination world while going through so many obstacles in the way, it really is the biggest highlight, but at the same time, the biggest highlight is the climax, which I'm gonna get to soon. During their encounters with Walt, every time Walt is on screen with the other characters that doesn't include Frankie, it really makes this movie a lot more interesting when you completely see that he is desperate to defend Frankie from any outsiders, even if those outsiders are Frankie's best friends. And let me just say, for the amount of times that he spent with Frankie during her times inside of the toy box, it's well he's starting all over, but with a different friend instead of the friend that created him. And when he's willing to trap Frankie into his imagination world without her leaving, I'm pretty sure that he got the jackpot, considering that no other person will ever be Frankie in this situation if they're ever mistreated by so many people in the real world. I would go on about how this imagination world is like, and I would praise most of the sequences, but at the same time, we would be here all day. Every single bit of this scene is probably the best part, so I don't want to discuss them in further detail. The only thing I can say is that the gaming bit towards the middle of this movie is my favorite, but then again, I'm into video games, so that's mostly debatable. After Frankie denies to hang back to Foster so that she doesn't want to go back to the same life, Walt completely takes the 5 characters into a small house of Foster's, where everything is like a toy house that you would usually see in a Toys R Us store. And this leads to Frankie realizing that her friends were shrinked, and just when Walt was about to burst out in anger because of how he's gonna be rejected the same way as his original creator, Frankie actually understands, but it's also important to not hurt other people who are her friends. This is where we also realize that Walt is mostly unstable, since that he just can't handle the fact of being abandoned. And this honestly reminds me of Steven Universe the movie, but I'm gonna get to that video once that video is uploaded towards the end of this month. But consider that this movie's way of abandonment and loneliness is a lot more stressful, but not in the levels of stressful from Spinell from Steven Universe the movie, where she was abandoned from Pink Diamond. The family really had no other choice, so that they had to take Walt away in order to make things right for themselves. So if you really think that if the child who created Walt will easily come back and completely forgive him for nearly everything, it would be a possibility, but at the same time, he is still concerned of what bad things could happen when it comes to Walt's unstable behavior. Granted, his unstable behavior makes sense since that he's an imaginary friend who feels devastated for being abandoned, but his friend's parents literally had no other choice for how unstable he is. And it all shows when Mr. Herriman arrives and completely lashed out on him. By the way, it's never explained onto how Mr. Herriman survived all the obstacles that the main characters went through. Either that, he probably took a long shortcut that had nothing else going on and spared himself from all the trouble that the main characters went through. Anyway, after he gets lashed out from Mr. Herriman, he takes out all of his frustration, learning that Frankie is going to be taken away, so that he completely causes utter chaos in the imagination world. Seriously, the imagination world becomes a lot more chaotic when the characters are just trying to run away. And when you completely take the fact of what's inside is bigger than the outside of the box, really shows of how devastating this imaginary friend is compared to the other imaginary friends that we've seen from this show. This is why this is the best highlight out of any of the moments in this entire movie, mainly to see the mental breakdown from Walt itself. The imagination world that he built from the ground up only to be taken down because of his massive depression actually proves onto why Frankie is the major star throughout this entire movie, even though that she doesn't appear much in the middle of this film. And once the climax comes to a close with Walt growing accustomed to the real world with the stuffed body that Frankie made for him, is probably a great way to wrap up this entire movie after everything that Frankie had went through. Because if anyone wouldn't forgive her and accept her for who she really is and not treat her as a servant, then I'm pretty sure that this movie would have been nothing. Then again, a movie wouldn't do that kind of route because it will probably ruin the entire purpose of the movie's existence. Just stating the facts because the Foster episodes before that kind of did that when it comes to their execution on the plots. And let me just say, after reviewing those episodes, there was a reason onto why I'm going to be reviewing good episodes from now on. This movie is a prime example of what Foster's can do when it comes to its good qualities, for how they execute the characters normally in good, especially Frankie, introducing a new character that can change the entire imagination world into utter destruction if something bad happens to him. Literally everything from the beginning towards the end of this movie is why I consider this one of my favorite Cartoon Network movies. And when I say that towards movies based off of a show that I don't enjoy that much during this present time, it actually shows that I actually care about the qualities of the show more on the negatives. I give this movie an 8.5 out of 10.
Let's get this started again.